What if I told you the version of you who has been watching, waiting, analyzing, is no longer who you are? For so long you've been the observer, noticing patterns, feeling energies shift, sensing something bigger unfolding behind the scenes. You saw signs others ignored. You felt pulled towards something you couldn't fully explain. But here's the truth no one told you. The observer phase was never meant to be permanent. It was preparation. And if this message found you right now at this exact moment, then something has already changed within you. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, now. Because the moment you become aware that you were just observing is the exact moment you're no longer that person anymore. So the question is, if you're not the observer anymore, then who are you becoming? There was a time when everything felt off. Not wrong exactly, just different. Like you were slightly out of sync with everything around you. Conversations felt surface level even when people thought they were deep. Situations repeated themselves in ways that felt too precise to be coincidence. And the strangest part? You started noticing it all. Without trying, it was like a switch flipped inside your mind. Suddenly you weren't just reacting to life anymore, you were watching it unfold. You began to see patterns in people's behavior. You could predict reactions before they happened. You sensed shifts in energy before anything actually changed, and at first it felt isolating, because while everyone else was fully immersed in the moment, you were standing just outside of it, aware, alert, and questioning everything. You may have even wondered, why do I feel like I'm observing my own life instead of living it? But that question itself was the sign, because most people never reach that point. Most people stay lost in automatic reactions, never stepping back far enough to truly see. But you did, and that's when the silent awakening began. Not loud, not dramatic, no sudden explosion of clarity, just a quiet shift where your awareness started expanding beyond the obvious. You began noticing how certain thoughts weren't really yours. They were conditioned, how certain emotions were triggered, not chosen, how certain paths felt familiar, almost like you had walked them before. And instead of blindly following, you paused, you watched, you questioned, you analyzed. That pause was powerful, because in that space between reaction and awareness, you started gaining control. Control over your thoughts, control over your responses, control over how deeply you engage with what's happening around you. But here's what you didn't realize at the time. This phase wasn't meant to give you all the answers. It was meant to change the way you see the questions. Every moment of observation was sharpening your perception. Every second of detachment was building your inner awareness. You weren't falling behind. You were stepping back to see the full picture, and now, that picture is becoming impossible to ignore. At some point, you probably asked yourself, why am I like this? Why do you notice things others completely miss? Why do you feel the need to step back instead of instantly reacting? Why does it feel like you're studying life instead of just living it? It's not random. You weren't placed in the observer phase by accident. You were shaped for it, because observation is not passive. It's one of the most powerful forms of preparation. Every moment you chose silence over reaction, you were building discipline. Every time you watched a situation unfold instead of jumping into it, you were developing perspective. And every time you sensed something deeper beneath the surface, you were strengthening your awareness. While others were caught inside the moment, you were learning how the moment works. You saw how emotions influence decisions, how patterns repeat when they're not understood, how people move unconsciously through cycles they don't even realize they're in. And without knowing it, you were collecting data, not in a logical, analytical way only, but on a deeper level. You were learning timing, you were learning energy, you were learning cause and effect in real time. That's why you felt different. Because you weren't just experiencing reality, you were decoding it. But here's the part most people never understand. Observation is a training ground. It teaches you how to see clearly without distortion, how to pause before reacting, how to separate what's real from what's conditioned. Because if you tried to take action without this phase, you would just repeat the same unconscious patterns as everyone else. You would move, but without direction, act, but without awareness. And that's not power. Real power comes from understanding first. That's why your journey started with observation. Because before you can influence anything, before you can change your path, before you can step into control, you have to see reality exactly as it is. No filters, no assumptions, No automatic reactions, just clarity. And now that you've built that clarity, the role you were preparing for is starting to reveal itself. But here's something most people in this phase never realize. The same awareness that woke you up can also quietly hold you back. At first, observing felt powerful. You stepped back, you saw clearly, you understood more than before. But over time, something subtle started to happen. You didn't just observe situations anymore. You started analyzing every possible outcome. Every decision became something to evaluate. Every move became something to question. What if this goes wrong? What if I'm misreading this? What if there's something I'm not seeing yet? And without noticing, you moved from awareness into hesitation. Because observation, when it goes too far, turns into overthinking. You start waiting for certainty, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for one more sign to confirm what you already feel. But that moment never fully arrives. So you stay where you are, watching others move forward while you stay in the background, telling yourself you're still figuring things out. And it feels logical, it feels safe, but deep down, something doesn't sit right. Because a part of you knows. You're not stuck because you don't understand. You're stuck because you haven't allowed yourself to act. That's the hidden trap. Observation gives you clarity, but it also gives you endless reasons to delay. You can always analyze more. You can always wait longer. You can always tell yourself, I'll move when I'm ready. But here's the truth most people avoid. Readiness doesn't come from thinking. It comes from movement. The longer you stay in observation, the harder it becomes to step out of it, because you get comfortable being the one who watches, instead of the one who participates. And slowly, you start mistaking awareness for progress, but awareness without action is just a loop that feels meaningful, but keeps you in the same place. And right now, you're standing at the edge of that loop. Either you continue observing or you break out of it. At first, it was subtle, almost easy to ignore, a feeling you couldn't fully explain, a quiet restlessness that didn't have a clear source. Nothing in your external world had dramatically changed, but internally something felt different. The same situations that once kept your attention started to feel repetitive. The same patterns you used to analyze no longer felt interesting. They felt exhausting. And the strangest part, observing didn't feel satisfying anymore. You could still see everything clearly. You could still read between the lines. You could still understand what was happening beneath the surface. But now there was a new feeling layered on top of it. A pull, a quiet but persistent pressure, pushing you forward. You may have tried to ignore it, telling yourself, maybe I just need more time. Maybe I need to understand things a little deeper first. But the feeling didn't go away. Because it wasn't confusion. It was transition. This is the moment most people don't recognize. The point where observation stops feeling like growth and starts feeling like limitation. You begin to feel stuck, not because you lack clarity, but because you have too much of it without movement. And that creates tension, a tension between what you know and what you're not doing. You can feel it in small moments, when you hold back something you want to say, when you delay a decision you already understand, when you choose to stay in the familiar, even though it no longer fits. That discomfort, that's not a sign to slow down. That's a signal that your current state can't contain who you're becoming anymore. Because the observer version of you was never meant to stay in control forever. It was meant to guide you to this exact point, and now your energy is shifting from watching to wanting to move. That's why things feel different. That's why staying still feels heavier than before. You're not losing control. You're outgrowing stillness. This is the part no one really prepares you for. Because up until now, being the observer felt like growth. It felt like evolution. It even became part of how you see yourself. You became the one who understands, the one who notices what others miss, the one who doesn't react, but reflects. And without realizing it, that identity became comfortable. It gave you a sense of control, a sense of separation from chaos, a sense that you were ahead in some way. But here's the truth. Every identity, no matter how advanced it feels, has a limit. And when you reach that limit, it doesn't expand with you. It breaks. That's what you're starting to feel now. Because the version of you who only observes can't exist in the next phase you're stepping into. You can't keep saying, I understand everything. while doing nothing with that understanding. You can't stay in the role of watcher when something inside you is demanding participation. So what happens? Conflict, a quiet internal resistance. Part of you wants to move forward, to take action, to step in, to finally do something. But another part of you holds on to the safety of observing, to the comfort of analyzing instead of risking, to the identity you've built over time. And that tension creates discomfort. You may feel uncertain, even though you've never been more aware. You may feel lost, even though you understand more than ever before. But you're not actually lost. You're in between identities. The old version of you is dissolving, but the new version hasn't fully stabilized yet. That's why it feels unstable. Because you're no longer who you used to be, but you haven't fully stepped into who you're becoming. And here's the key most people miss. This isn't something you fix by thinking more. You don't figure out your way through identity collapse. You move through it, because the new version of you is not built through observation. It's built through action, through decisions, through risk, through stepping into situations instead of standing outside them. That's what feels uncomfortable, because now you're not just risking outcomes. You're risking the version of yourself you've been holding on to. But that's the cost of growth. You don't carry your old identity into the next phase. You shed it. This is where everything stops being theoretical and starts becoming real. Up until now, you've been building awareness, seeing clearly, understanding deeply, but now you're being pulled into something different. Not to observe life, but to step into it. And that shift feels unfamiliar. Because observing gave you distance. It gave you time to think, to analyze, to stay in control. But becoming requires presence. It requires movement, without having every answer first. And that's where most people hesitate. Because once you move, you can't go back to being just the observer. Now your choices have weight. Now your actions create real consequences. Now you're part of the experience, not separate from it. But here's the truth. This is what you were preparing for the entire time. Every moment of awareness you built wasn't meant to keep you watching. It was meant to guide how you act. Because action without awareness is chaos. But awareness without action is stagnation. And you've already outgrown stagnation. That's why you feel the push. You might notice it in small ways first. A sudden urge to speak up when you normally stay quiet. A decision you've been delaying that now feels impossible to ignore. A path you've been thinking about that suddenly feels urgent. These aren't random impulses. These are signals. Signals that your role is changing. You're no longer here to just understand patterns. You're here to interrupt them, to make different choices, to respond in new ways, to step into situations you would have only observed before. And yes, it feels uncertain, because you won't have full clarity before you act. You won't feel 100% ready. You won't eliminate all risk. But that's not a flaw in the process. That is the process. Because becoming isn't something you think your way into. It's something you step into, one decision at a time. And with each step, you stop being the one who watches reality unfold and start becoming the one who shapes it. Now comes the part that sounds simple, but is actually the most difficult shift of all. The first real step out of the observer phase. It's not a massive leap. It's not a life-changing decision all at once. It's something much smaller and much more uncomfortable. It's choosing to act without having full certainty. That's it. And that's exactly why most people avoid it. Because your mind has been trained to analyze, to calculate, to understand before moving. It wants guarantees, it wants clarity, it wants to know the outcome before you take the step. But that's not how this phase works anymore. You've already gathered the awareness. You've already seen the patterns. You've already understood more than enough. Now the only thing left is movement. But here's where the resistance shows up. You'll hear thoughts like, I need a little more time. I'm not fully ready yet. What if this isn't the right move? And all of that sounds reasonable. But if you look closely, it's the same loop, just in a different form. Because the truth is, you don't need more information. You need a decision. And that decision won't feel comfortable. In fact, it will feel incomplete. Like you're moving without the full picture. Like you're stepping into something you can't fully control. That feeling? That's the sign you're doing it right. Because the first step isn't about confidence, it's about willingness. Willingness to move forward, even when your mind hasn't fully caught up yet. And here's what most people don't realize. The moment you take that step, something shifts immediately.